Welcome back. We'll end this course with a topic that I feel is essential to include in any course on ethical issues in data science or in computing for that matter, the impact of our field on the overall future of work on this planet. By the way, the words future of work are commonly used and they refer to both how many jobs will be available and what jobs will be available. I've included this in the module on medical applications, but to be honest, the link to this topic of the medical application topic to the future of work is partial at best. Now, the medical application topic certainly provides good motivation for the future of work. We've already seen examples where advances in data science may reduce the role of humans in healthcare. One of them is radiology, where we've seen that the AI may be ahead of where humans are, and there's questions about what the role of radiologists is going to be going forward. Another one, you may remember when we were talking about the Israeli healthcare record system, there was discussion of a new app where you could talk just to the app, describe your medical condition, and based on looking at a wide set of medical records, it would suggest medical tests that you could then take without ever interfacing with medical personnel. So that is presumably in the long run going to reduce the number of people who need to be working in those medical roles. At a much more mundane level, I know that now if I have to check in for whether it's a doctor's appointment or a laboratory test, I just do that either through a kiosk or an online application, whereas I used to go through a human being. So presumably there's jobs that are being reduced there too. And while we haven't discussed it explicitly, just as jobs are being reduced or eliminated, they're being created. Because everything that we've been talking about is creating new jobs, whether it's people, say, in data science and other fields who are working on the genetic editing problems, or people who are working on the applications of AI and machine learning to healthcare, or the people who are creating those new large health databases. Those are all newer increasing jobs. But having motivated this a little bit through healthcare, we should say honestly that the future of work topic isn't driven by the healthcare field. It's driven by a multitude of jobs. It is, however, driven in a major way by the impacts of data science and computing on many applications. I should have said many occupations. So in this lesson, we'll try to give you just a simple sense of that, I think for two reasons. One of it is what I just said. We are quite responsible for, I don't know if you should say a problem or a phenomenon, but for this topic occurring at a rapid pace. So we should be invested in it. The second one is actually more to your benefit. You will be impacted by this over the course of your careers, so it's a good thing to learn and think about. Like many other topics in this course, we could make a whole course in this topic, especially if it was a course in economics. I'm just going to try to give a very basic introduction, first via some interesting charts, and then by going through the few simple articles in the reading list. Then we'll all engage in a final group discussion where you share your own perspectives on this topic, which is likely to be a topic that you continue to consider, to hear about, to think about, and debate over the entire course of your lifetimes. I'll make one more introductory comment. I've chosen not to go through the multiple economic predictions of where the future of work is headed, both in the United States and particularly worldwide. But I should state that there's many such predictions, and they vary widely, not only in magnitude, but in sign. What I mean by that is that some of these say that the jobs will decrease in the aggregate. Some say that jobs will increase in the aggregate. Some say that that amount will be relatively small, and some say that it'll be quite large. There do seem to be only two things that all of these discussions agree upon. One is that the distribution of jobs that humans do will change dramatically and quickly, and the other is that we don't really know what the aggregate impact is going to be. Before we proceed, we'll have our final virtual background conversation. It's too bad that this wasn't a longer course because I had plenty more photos that I would have loved to have used. I said that the last photo was taken from a religious building. It's taken from inside the Sagrada Familia Church in Barcelona, Spain. Sagrada Familia, which means sacred family in Spanish, is a beautiful, massive, and eclectic church designed by the famous architect Antoni Gaudi that is now in the process of being completed over a century after it was begun. That's not a mistake, a century after it was begun. It's worth looking at on the internet. It's a fantastic building. And if you're ever there, it's absolutely worth seeing in person as well. For the last class, it seemed only appropriate to come back to Boulder and in the winter season that Colorado is so well known for. This is a photo of Boulder's characteristic Flatirons Mountains right after a snowstorm. And it was taken from a stairway in the engineering center, which is where our data science program is housed. We'll start with a succession of 3 visuals that tell the story of the past, the present, and the future of work. I should say first that these 3 visuals are all about the United States, although the topic is global. I made this decision primarily because it's pretty difficult to get global data that looks at things in a consistent way. It's also entirely more complex discussion when you look at this issue globally, because the changes are going on all across the world, but the sorts of jobs that people have and are moving to in different countries differ. And so you get into a lot more complexity. And so for this discussion, we'll look at the United States, but many of the things that we learn extrapolate in certain ways to many other parts of the world. So the first chart illustrates the change in job categories in the United States over a period of nearly 2 centuries. And I find this a really fascinating graph. So to hit some highlights of it, you can see that agricultural employment went from about 60% of the population, so the majority of the population, down to about 5% of the population in this period of time. Manufacturing grew from a little over 10% to a maximum of about 1/4 of the population, and then has shrunk back down again. Retail jobs have more than doubled to about 20% of the population. And if you put together all the parts at the bottom of the graph, you'll see that the professional jobs went from under 10% of the workforce to about half of the workforce. So these are huge swings, and people have adapted to them. And you will find people who write on this who say that this more or less proves that this will all work itself out, that if we lose jobs, that we'll gain jobs and people will adapt. But you'll find plenty of other people who make the point that I think is valid, that it's simply not that simple. First of all, there isn't a guarantee that we'll always produce jobs to make up for the ones that we lose. But much more important is the timescale. Think about the Industrial Revolution. That played out over a period of over 100 years. That's 4 or 5 generations, the way we tend to count generations. So that means that the people who had to adapt by learning new information and new skills adapted over a series of generations, that it wasn't necessarily the person who was losing a job who adapted, but maybe their children or their grandchildren. Now we're seeing changes on a scale that we will almost certainly have to adapt within a single lifetime. And that is much more challenging. That's not the way that humans have generally changed. The second chart shows which jobs are in the top 5 in each state in the United States. A quick summary of this. The main jobs, let's play that back. The second chart shows which jobs are in the top 5 in each state in the United States. So in each map, if a state is colored blue, that means that that job is one of the top 5 in that state. So to quickly summarize what this chart shows, the main jobs that are in the top 5 are in order: drivers of trucks or other vehicles, cashiers, retail managers, retail salespeople, teachers, and nurses. So what do you immediately observe? The first four of those clearly are endangered by technology. Driving jobs are talked about as mainly being endangered by the creation of autonomous vehicles, which of course couldn't exist without data science, but the technology goes much broader than that. And the next three, cashiers and the retail jobs, are impacted even more directly and primarily due to data science. By the way, I should also mention that the first category, the drivers, you were hearing for a number of years that those jobs would be going away quickly. I think the jury is still out on that. That progression is happening at least more slowly than people had expected. But the next set of jobs, the ones that data science is directly impacting, the cashiers and the retail jobs, definitely are endangered quickly. And the pandemic has probably made them be endangered even more rapidly than they would have otherwise. The third chart makes or reinforces the points that the second one did. There's actually a lot of information packed into this chart. The circles show different occupations and give three pieces of information about each. First of all, the size of the circle corresponds to how many people in the United States have that job, and that's also shown by the position of the circle on the x-axis. The farther to the right, the more people hold that job. The position on the y-axis shows how likely the jobs are to be displaced. That is, the closer to the top, the more likely they are to be displaced. And then the color of the circle shows the average educational level, where the darker the color, the lower the educational level. So what are some observations that you can make just by looking at this chart in the aggregate? One of them is that there's a bunch of dark circles at the top. And what this says is that the jobs that are most vulnerable to be eliminated are the jobs that are held by the least educated people, which unfortunately will make it harder for the people who lose jobs to readjust to new opportunities for employment. A second observation is that data science has a lot to do with the jobs that are vulnerable, such as the office support job, which is the largest and the most vulnerable category. A third, if you want to be selfish, you'll see that the little circle STEM professionals is in a very good position on the chart, although a later article even dives into that discussion a little bit more deeply. And then if you really look at this, you even find some surprising things there. I'll just comment on one, and that is that the construction trades are considered to be quite vulnerable. You might not think that, but I've read a little bit about this, and there's parts of jobs that are done in construction, such as roofing, that people think that in a fairly short period of time will be taken over by robots.